The blood-red sun sank behind the distant hills as Emma Andrews clutched the letter in her trembling hands, the words blurring through her tears as she stood alone on the porch of the only home she'd ever known in Austin, Texas. It was 1875, and the world as she knew it had just collapsed around her. "You and your bastard child are no longer welcome in this household." Her father's handwriting was precise and cold, just like the man himself. Emma pressed a hand to her swollen belly, 5 months along now and impossible to hide beneath even her loosest dresses. At 22, she had become exactly what her strict Methodist parents had warned against: unwed, pregnant, and now homeless. The April evening air held the promise of spring, but Emma felt only winter in her bones as she sank onto the porch steps. The boarding house where she'd worked as a housekeeper for the past 3 years stood just across the street, its windows glowing with lamplight. Mrs. Crawford had been kind enough, but even she had given Emma notice this morning. "I'm sorry, dear," the older woman had said, her eyes filled with pity. "But the other boarders have started to talk. I can't risk my business. You have no future here alone, not in your condition." The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Emma from her thoughts. She quickly wiped her tears, straightening her posture as best she could. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the growing darkness, and Emma recognized the silhouette immediately: Thomas Emerson, the quiet cowboy who sometimes took meals at the boarding house when he was in town. "Miss Andrews," Thomas called, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time on horseback than off it. His dark hair curled beneath the brim of his hat, and his eyes, a startling shade of blue, regarded her with concern. "Mrs. Crawford mentioned I might find you here. Said you might be in need of assistance." Emma looked away, embarrassment burning her cheeks. "Mrs. Crawford should mind her own affairs," she said stiffly, though there was no real heat in her words. "I'm quite all right, Mr. Emerson." Thomas moved closer, his spurs jingling softly. At 30, he was known throughout the county as a man of few words but reliable character. He worked as a trail guide, sometimes a ranch hand, taking whatever honest work came his way. "With all due respect, madam, you don't look all right." His voice was gentle, his Texas drawl more pronounced in the quiet evening. "And sitting alone on a porch with a carpetbag beside you suggests you might be without lodging tonight." Emma's pride warred with practicality. The baby kicked, a reminder of her responsibility to more than just herself now. "My father has made his feelings clear about my situation," she finally admitted, one hand unconsciously moving to her belly. Thomas's gaze followed the movement, but his expression remained neutral. "The child's father, gone, headed to California with promises to send for me." Emma gave a bitter laugh. "That was 4 months ago." Thomas nodded slowly, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair, a gesture Emma had noticed he made when deep in thought. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Andrews," he said after a moment. "Not charity, mind you, an arrangement that might benefit us both." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Emerson, if you're suggesting—" "Nothing improper," he interrupted quickly. "I've recently purchased land near Fort Davis." "Good land. But a man alone has little chance of building something lasting out there." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "What I'm suggesting is a marriage of convenience. You need security for yourself and your child. I need a partner, someone to help establish a homestead." Emma stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want to marry me? A woman carrying another man's child? I want a chance at a real life, Miss Andrews, same as you." Thomas placed his hat back on his head. "I've saved enough to get us started. It won't be easy, but it would be a future." "But why me? Surely there are unmarried women who would. I've known you for 3 years now. Watched how you work, how you treat people. You're kind but not soft, strong but not hard. His eyes met hers directly. And now you need help. Sometimes life gives us clear signs about which path to take. Emma looked down at her father's letter, still clutched in her hand. You understand what people will say about you taking on another man's responsibility. A slight smile crossed Thomas's face. Miss Andrews, I stopped caring about what people say a long time ago. He extended his hand to her. What do you say? We could be on a train west tomorrow morning. We start anew. Emma looked at his outstretched hand, then back at the darkened windows of her family home. 22 years of memories, good and bad, lay behind those walls. Ahead of her stretched nothing but uncertainty, except for this unexpected offer from a man she knew only in passing. Mr. Emerson, she said slowly, this is madness. Perhaps, he agreed. But sometimes madness is exactly what's needed. Emma stood, straightening her skirts with as much dignity as she could muster. Then, with a deep breath, she placed her hand in his. Yes, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I accept your proposal. Thomas nodded once, his expression solemn. I'll make arrangements for the marriage license first thing tomorrow. Can you be ready to travel by noon? I have nothing to pack beyond what's in this bag, Emma replied. Thomas looked at the small carpet bag. Then we'll need to remedy that before we leave. He picked up her bag, then offered his arm. For tonight, I've taken a room at the hotel. You can have it. I'll sleep in the stables with my horse. As they walked through the quiet streets of Austin, Emma felt the weight of stares from the few people they passed. By morning, gossip about her fallen state and Thomas's inexplicable gallantry would spread through town like wildfire. Yet for the first time in months, the burden of shame seemed lighter on her shoulders. True to his word, Thomas secured a marriage license the next morning. The ceremony was brief, performed by a justice of the peace who barely looked up from his paperwork. Emma wore her best dress, a pale blue cotton that strained slightly across her middle, while Thomas appeared in a clean shirt and his least worn pair of trousers. I now pronounce you man and wife, the justice said flatly, already reaching for the next document on his desk. You may kiss the bride. Thomas and Emma exchanged an awkward glance. Gently, he leaned forward and pressed his lips briefly to her forehead. Mrs. Emerson, he said quietly, the name sounding foreign to both of them. Mr. Emerson, she replied, a faint smile touching her lips despite the strangeness of it all. By mid-afternoon, they were on the westbound train, Emma watching through the window as Austin disappeared behind them. Thomas sat beside her, a book open on his lap, though Emma noticed he rarely turned the pages. Have you been to Fort Davis before? She asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Thomas nodded. Several times. The land there reminded me of where I grew up in Missouri. Good water, decent soil. The fort brings enough travelers through to support trade. And Indians? Emma asked hesitantly. The Comanches signed peace treaties 2 years ago. There's still trouble sometimes, but mostly it's quiet now. He paused. Are you afraid? Emma considered the question. I'm afraid of many things, Mr. Emerson. Indians are rather low on that list at present. A brief smile crossed his face. I reckon you might call me Thomas now. Seems fitting under the circumstances. Thomas, she repeated, testing the name, and I'm Emma. Emma, he echoed. It suits you. The train rocked gently beneath them, carrying them westward through the Texas landscape. Emma felt exhaustion settling into her bones, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up with her. Without meaning to, she drifted to sleep, her head coming to rest against Thomas's shoulder. When she woke, the sun was setting, painting the horizon in brilliant oranges and pinks. A weight across her shoulders made her realize that Thomas had placed his coat around her while she slept. Sorry, she murmured, straightening up. "I didn't mean to use you as a pillow." "No trouble," he replied. "You needed the rest." Emma's stomach growled loudly and she flushed with embarrassment. "Dinner will be served in the dining car soon," Thomas said, pretending not to notice. "Are you feeling up to it?" Emma nodded, suddenly ravenous. "The baby demands regular meals these days, whether I want them or not." They made their way to the dining car, where white-clothed tables and polished silver seemed at odds with the dusty landscape outside. The waiter seated them with a flourish, his eyes lingering briefly on Emma's wedding ring, a simple gold band Thomas had purchased that morning. "You didn't have to do that," Emma had said when he presented it to her. "A married woman should have a ring," had been his simple reply. Now, as they sat across from each other in the gently swaying dining car, Emma studied her new husband in the warm lamplight. Thomas Emerson was not a handsome man by conventional standards. His nose had clearly been broken at least once, and weather had carved lines around his eyes at a young age, but there was something compelling about his face. Strength, certainly, but also kindness in the way his eyes crinkled when he spoke. "Tell me about your family," Emma said as the waiter poured their coffee. "Do they know about our arrangement?" Thomas's expression remained neutral. "My parents died in '62. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I had a brother who fell at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "The war took so many." Thomas nodded. "What about yours? Beyond your father's letter, I mean." Emma traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "My mother died when I was 16. My father is strict in his beliefs. I have a younger sister who's married to a banker in Houston. We haven't spoken since my condition became known." She sighed. "Family is complicated, that it is." Thomas took a sip of his coffee. "Which is why we get to decide what kind of family we want to build." Emma looked up, surprised by his words. "You speak as though this is a real marriage." "Isn't it?" Thomas set down his cup. "We made vows. We're bound by law. The circumstances might be unusual, but the commitment is real, at least from my perspective." "And what exactly are you committing to, Thomas?" Emma asked, her voice low. "Raising another man's child as your own, living with a woman you barely know. What do you truly want from this arrangement?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady. "A partner," he finally said. "Someone to build a life with. I've been alone a long time, Emma. I've worked other men's land, driven other men's cattle, always moving, never putting down roots. This land near Fort Davis, it's the first thing that's been truly mine." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not a romantic man. I'm offering you safety, security, and respect. In return, I ask for your help, your counsel, and your loyalty. As for the child—" His eyes flickered to her middle. "Every child deserves a father who chooses them, even if blood says otherwise." Emma felt tears threatening and blinked them away. "You speak very eloquently for a man who claims not to be romantic." The hint of a smile touched his lips. "Don't tell anyone. I've cultivated a reputation for being a man of few words." The waiter arrived with their meal's beefsteak for Thomas, roasted chicken for Emma, and they fell into more practical conversation about the journey ahead. 2 more days by train to El Paso, then a stagecoach to Fort Davis. From there, Thomas explained, it would be a half-day's ride to the land he'd purchased. "It's only a cabin now," he warned. "Nothing fancy. I spent a month there last fall, clearing land and making it habitable, but it needs a woman's touch." "I'm not much for frills and lace," Emma replied. "But I can make a place comfortable enough." Thomas nodded approvingly. "That's all I ask." Later, as Thomas escorted her back to their compartment, the sleeping berth he'd secured for the journey, an awkwardness fell between them. "I'll find somewhere else to sleep," he said, reaching for his saddlebag. Emma caught his arm. "Don't be ridiculous. The compartment has 2 berths. We're married now, Thomas. There's no need for you to sleep on a bench in the passenger car." Thomas studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "As you wish." That night, in the darkness of their compartment, separated only by the narrow space between the upper and lower berths, Emma listened to Thomas's steady breathing and wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago she had been destitute, disgraced, and desperate. Now she was Mrs. Thomas Emerson, headed west to a new life on the frontier. "Are you awake?" Thomas's voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes," she answered. "Are you afraid?" Emma considered the question. "Yes," she admitted. "But not of you." "Good," he said simply. "Get some rest, Emma. We have a long journey ahead." Emma closed her eyes, one hand resting protectively over her growing child. "Good night, Thomas." "Good night, wife," he replied, the words still unfamiliar but somehow comforting in the swaying darkness of the train. The journey west seemed to Emma like a dream sequence, long hours of watching the landscape change through train windows, brief stops at dusty stations, nights spent in strange beds. Thomas remained a constant presence beside her, attentive but never intrusive, his quiet strength becoming something she unconsciously leaned on. In El Paso, they transferred to the stagecoach for the final leg to Fort Davis. The jolting ride was hard on Emma's pregnant body, and by the second day she was pale with fatigue. "Not much longer," Thomas promised, offering her his canteen. "We'll rest properly when we reach the fort." The stagecoach driver, a weathered man named Potter, eyed Emma's condition with concern. "Your missus don't look too good, Emerson. Baby coming early, maybe." "The baby's not due for another 4 months," Thomas replied firmly. "She just needs rest." Emma managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, truly, just tired from the journey." But when they finally arrived at Fort Davis, Thomas insisted on securing a room at the small hotel rather than pressing on to their homestead immediately. "The lands waited this long," he said, guiding her toward the hotel's entrance. "It can wait another day or two." Fort Davis proved to be little more than a cluster of buildings surrounding the military installation. But after weeks of travel, even this rough settlement seemed welcoming to Emma. The hotel was clean, if basic, and the owner's wife brought up a tray of hot food and fresh milk without being asked. "Thought you might be too tired to come down to supper," the woman said kindly. "Stagecoach is hard enough when you're not in a delicate condition." "Thank you," Emma said gratefully, suddenly ravenous at the sight of the steaming stew and fresh bread. Once they were alone, Thomas sat on the room's single chair while Emma took the bed. "You should eat too," she said, gesturing to the ample food. Thomas nodded and joined her on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance as they shared the meal. "What's the name of our new home?" Emma asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Thomas looked up, a questioning expression on his face. "The land," Emma clarified. "What do you call it?" "Haven't given it a name," Thomas admitted. "Never seemed important until now." "Every home should have a name," Emma insisted. "Something that gives it character, that makes it ours." Thomas considered this. "What would you suggest?" Emma thought for a moment. "New Haven," she said finally. "Because that's what it is for both of us, isn't it? A new beginning, a safe place." A rare smile spread across Thomas's face, transforming his features. "New Haven it is, then." They left Fort Davis 2 days later, Emma having regained enough strength for the final leg of their journey. Thomas had arranged for a wagon rather than horseback, filling it with supplies for the homestead, seeds for planting, tools, fabric for curtains, and a rocking chair that he presented to Emma with almost shy pride. "Every home needs a proper chair for a mother," he said simply. The land, when they finally reached it just before sunset, took Emma's breath away. A small cabin stood in a clearing, backed by pine-covered hills and fronted by a stream that glittered in the fading light. Wildflowers dotted the meadow, and the air smelled of pine and sage. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure around her waist. "Welcome to New Haven, Mrs. Emerson." The cabin was small but solidly built, just one main room with a stone fireplace, plus a lean-to addition that Thomas explained would be their bedroom. A table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed were the only furniture besides the rocking chair they'd brought. "It's not much," Thomas said, watching her face carefully. "It's perfect," Emma replied honestly. "A perfect place to start." That night, after Thomas had brought in their belongings and started a fire in the hearth, they sat together at the rough wooden table, planning their immediate needs. "The garden should be planted as soon as possible," Thomas said. "I cleared land for it last fall, but there wasn't time to plant." Emma nodded, making mental notes. "We'll need chickens, and perhaps a cow eventually. There's a family about 5 miles east who might sell us some chickens. As for a cow, I thought to buy one in town next month when I deliver lumber to the fort." "You're a carpenter as well as a cowboy?" Emma asked. Thomas shrugged. "Jack of all trades, master of none. My father taught me enough to get by. I can build what we need if not fancy." "Fancy isn't necessary," Emma assured him. "Sturdy is better." As the evening deepened, the question of sleeping arrangements hung unspoken between them. There was only the one narrow bed in the lean-to. "I'll sleep by the fire," Thomas said finally, rising to his feet. "You take the bed." "Thomas," Emma said hesitantly, "this is your home. I don't want to put you out of your own bed." "Our home," he corrected gently. "And it's no trouble. You need proper rest in your condition." Emma wanted to argue further but found herself too exhausted from the journey. "Just for tonight, then," she conceded. "Tomorrow we'll figure out a better arrangement." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed in her new home, Emma listened to the night sounds of the wilderness around them, so different from the city noises she'd known all her life. An owl hooted somewhere nearby, and the stream made a gentle rushing sound beyond the cabin walls. Occasionally, she heard Thomas shifting on his bedroll near the fire, and she wondered what thoughts kept him awake. The days that followed fell into a pattern as they established their life together. Thomas worked from dawn till dusk, tending the small herd of cattle he'd started with 6 head, building fences and cutting lumber. Emma planted the garden, set up her kitchen, and made the cabin more homelike with simple touches: curtains sewn from the fabric they'd brought, wildflowers in a jar on the table, a braided rug before the hearth. They were cautious around each other, unfailingly polite, each careful not to intrude on the other's space. Thomas continued to sleep by the fireplace despite Emma's protests, insisting that he was comfortable enough. "I spent years sleeping under the stars on cattle drives," he reminded her. "This is luxury by comparison." A week after their arrival, Emma was kneading bread dough when a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table as the pain intensified, then slowly ebbed away. "Just a cramp," she told herself firmly. "Nothing to worry about." But when a second pain came 10 minutes later, stronger than the first, fear clutched at her heart. It was too early, much too early for the baby to come. "Thomas," she called, her voice thin with panic. But Thomas was out checking fences and wouldn't return until evening. Emma eased herself into the rocking chair, trying to stay calm as the pains continued, growing closer together. By mid-afternoon, she could no longer deny what was happening. The baby was coming, 4 months too soon. When Thomas finally returned at dusk, he found Emma curled in the rocking chair, her face white with pain and tear-streaked. "Emma." He crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her. "What is it?" The baby, she nodded, unable to speak as another contraction gripped her. Thomas's face hardened with determination. "I'm taking you to the doctor in Fort Davis." Emma shook her head weakly. "Won't make it. Too far." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his expression torn. "I don't know how to deliver a baby, Emma." She gripped his hand. "Neither do I, but it's coming anyway." For the next hour, Thomas moved with focused efficiency, heating water, gathering clean linens, and helping Emma to the bed. When the time came, he delivered the tiny baby boy with hands that trembled only slightly, his voice maintaining a steady calm that belied the fear in his eyes. The baby, born too soon, made no cry when he emerged. His perfect tiny body lay still in Thomas's large hands, his eyes closed as if in sleep. "Thomas?" Emma's voice broke the silence, a mother's desperate question. Thomas looked up, his face stricken. Wordlessly, he wrapped the infant in a clean cloth and placed him in Emma's waiting arms. "My son," Emma whispered, touching the baby's perfect, silent face. "My beautiful son." Thomas sat beside her on the bed, his arm going around her shoulders as tears streamed down her face. "I'm so sorry, Emma," he murmured, his own voice thick with emotion. They buried the baby the next morning on a gentle slope behind the cabin, where wildflowers grew in abundance. Thomas fashioned a small wooden cross, carefully carving the date, and the name Emma had chosen, Samuel, after her grandfather. The days that followed passed in a haze of grief for Emma. She moved through her tasks mechanically, her body recovering from the birth while her heart remained raw with loss. Thomas stayed close to the cabin, finding work that kept him within calling distance, his watchful eyes never far from her. One evening, as they sat before the fire, the silence between them heavier than usual, Emma finally spoke the fear that had haunted her since Samuel's birth. "If you want to end our arrangement, I would understand," she said quietly, staring into the flames. "The child was my reason for needing help, and now—" "Emma." Thomas's voice was firm enough to make her look up. "Do you want to leave?" She blinked, surprised by the directness of his question. "No," she admitted, "but I wouldn't hold you to a bargain made under different circumstances." Thomas moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "This was never just a bargain to me. This is our home, yours and mine. Samuel is buried on our land. He's part of New Haven now, part of us." Tears filled Emma's eyes, but for the first time since losing the baby, they weren't solely tears of grief. "You truly mean that?" "I've never said anything I didn't mean." Thomas's blue eyes held hers steadily. "I promised to build a life with you, Emma. That promise stands." That night, when Thomas prepared his usual bedroll by the fire, Emma stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Please," she said softly. "I don't want to be alone tonight." Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. In the small bedroom, he lay beside her on the narrow bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance until Emma turned toward him in the darkness, seeking comfort in his warmth. "Is this all right?" she whispered. In answer, Thomas drew her closer, his arms encircling her with gentle strength. "Rest now," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you." For the first time since Samuel's death, Emma slept without dreams. Summer turned to fall, and as the land around them prepared for winter, Emma felt herself slowly healing. The garden had yielded a good harvest. Thomas had added 6 more head to their small herd, and the cabin now boasted a proper bedroom addition that he had built through long summer evenings. They settled into a partnership that grew more comfortable with each passing day. Thomas taught Emma to ride and shoot, essential skills for frontier life. Emma showed Thomas how to make dumplings the way her grandmother had taught her, and was rewarded with his look of surprised delight at the first taste. At night, they shared the new, wider bed Thomas had crafted, the initial awkwardness giving way to a companionable closeness. Sometimes Emma would wake to find Thomas's arm draped protectively across her waist, or her head pillowed on his shoulder. In late October, they made the journey to Fort Davis for supplies. The small settlement was busier than Emma remembered, with new buildings under construction at the fort. "Town's growing," Thomas observed as he helped Emma down from the wagon. "Might be good for trade." They separated to complete their errands, Thomas to the lumber yard and the blacksmith, Emma to the general store for provisions. As she examined bolts of fabric, trying to decide between practical muslin or slightly more frivolous calico, Emma became aware of whispers behind her. "That's her, the Emerson woman. Heard she lost a baby back in the summer. Can you imagine, out there all alone with just her husband, no doctor, no midwife?" Emma stiffened, her hands stilling on the fabric. She turned to face the three women who had fallen silent at her movement. "Good afternoon, ladies," she said with all the dignity she could muster. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Emma Emerson." The oldest of the women, a gray-haired matron in a severe black dress, had the grace to look embarrassed. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said stiffly. "And this is Mrs. Parker and Miss Jensen." Emma nodded politely. "It's a pleasure to meet you all. Are you new to Fort Davis?" "My husband and I haven't been to town in several months." "My husband is the new doctor," Mrs. Parker offered, her curious gaze taking in Emma's simple but neat appearance. "We arrived from San Antonio last month." "A doctor? How wonderful!" Emma managed a genuine smile. "The settlement certainly needs one." "Your homestead is quite far out, I understand," Mrs. Whitfield said, her tone suggesting this was somehow improper. "New Haven is about half a day's ride," Emma confirmed. "My husband has built us a lovely home there." "New Haven?" Miss Jensen asked, her young face showing genuine interest. "What a pretty name." "Thank you," Emma replied, warming to the young woman. "It's what our home has been for us, a new beginning." The conversation shifted to more neutral topics: the growing town, the upcoming harvest festival, the new schoolhouse being planned. By the time Thomas found her an hour later, Emma was comfortably chatting with Miss Jensen about garden plantings for the coming spring. "Ready to head home?" Thomas asked, his hand coming to rest at the small of Emma's back, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the other women. "Yes, I think we have everything we need," Emma said, gathering her purchases. As they walked back to the wagon, Thomas leaned closer. "Everything all right? You look a bit flushed." Emma smiled up at him. "Just making new acquaintances." "Small town life means everyone knowing your business, it seems." Thomas frowned slightly. "They weren't unkind to you." "No," Emma assured him. "Just curious. Miss Jensen asked if she might visit someday. She's interested in seeing our garden." Thomas looked surprised. "You'd want company out at New Haven?" "Maybe occasionally." Emma arranged her packages in the wagon. "It might be nice to have a friend or two, don't you think?" Thomas considered this as he helped her up to the seat. "I suppose so, as long as they don't expect fancy entertainment." Emma laughed, a sound that had been rare since losing Samuel, but was becoming more frequent in recent weeks. "I don't think Miss Jensen would mind our simple ways. She seems a practical sort." As they drove out of town, Emma's thoughts turned to their home and the life they were building there. She had come to love New Haven more than she ever expected: the quiet beauty of the land, the satisfaction of work done with her own hands, and most surprisingly, the steadfast companionship of the man beside her. Winter came early that year, bringing fierce winds and occasional snow to their corner of Texas. The cabin, snug and warm with its stone fireplace, became a haven against the elements. Emma found herself treasuring the long evenings when blizzards howled outside while she and Thomas sat by the fire, she with her mending, he whittling or reading aloud from one of the few books they owned. It was during one such evening, with December winds rattling the shutters, that Emma realized something had changed between them. Thomas was reading from David Copperfield, his deep voice bringing Dickens's words to life. When Emma looked up from her sewing and found herself struck by the sight of him, his strong profile in the firelight, the gentleness of his hands as he turned the pages, the absolute security she felt in his presence. The realization came to her with quiet certainty she had fallen in love with her husband. The thought should have startled her, but instead it settled in her heart like a long-awaited truth finally acknowledged. This man who had taken her in at her lowest moment, who had buried her son with tender reverence, who worked every day to build a life for them, he had become essential to her in ways she had never anticipated. "Emma," Thomas's voice broke into her thoughts. "Are you all right? You've gone very still." She blinked, realizing she had been staring at him. "I'm fine," she said softly, "just thinking how fortunate I am." Thomas's expression held a question, but he didn't press further, returning to the book. Emma bent over her sewing again, her heart beating a new rhythm as she considered what to do with this revelation. That night, as they prepared for bed, Emma gathered her courage. Thomas had always been scrupulously respectful of her space, maintaining a careful distance even as they shared the bed. But tonight, as he extinguished the lamp and settled beside her, Emma turned toward him instead of away. "Thomas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." He turned to face her, his features barely visible in the dim light from the banked fire. Emma reached out, her fingers tentatively touching his cheek. "I've never properly thanked you for all you've done for me." She felt rather than saw his slight smile. "No thanks needed between husband and wife." "That's just it," Emma said, her heart pounding. "We started as a marriage in name only, but I find myself wishing for more." Thomas went very still. "Emma, are you saying—" "I'm saying that I care for you, Thomas, deeply." She moved closer, her hand now resting against his chest where she could feel the rapid beating of his heart. "I'm saying that I would like to be a true wife to you if you'll have me." For a long moment, Thomas didn't move, and Emma feared she had misread everything. Then his hand came up to cover hers. "I've loved you since the moment you put your hand in mine on that porch in Austin," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I never wanted you to feel obligated. I wanted you to choose me if you ever did, freely and without reservation." Joy bloomed in Emma's chest. "I do choose you, Thomas. With all my heart." His kiss, when it came, was gentle and questioning at first, then deepening as Emma responded with all the newly discovered feelings she had for him. When they finally drew apart, breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Are you certain, Emma? There's no rush?" In answer, she kissed him again, pouring all her certainty into the gesture. That night they became truly husband and wife, their union blessed by the love that had grown slowly and surely between them over the months of shared work, shared grief, and shared dreams. Afterwards, as Emma lay in the circle of Thomas's arms, she felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that she had never expected to find when she stepped onto that train in Austin. "What are you thinking?" Thomas murmured against her hair. "I'm thinking that sometimes life's hardest moments lead us exactly where we need to be," she replied. "If I hadn't lost everything in Austin, I would never have found you, never have found New Haven." Thomas tightened his arms around her. "We've made a good start here," he said. "But there's so much more I want to build for us." "We'll build it together," Emma promised. "Whatever comes next." What came next, they discovered in early spring, was the promise of new life. Emma missed her monthly courses for the second time and recognized the familiar symptoms: the tender breasts, the morning queasiness, the bone-deep fatigue that came and went. When she told Thomas, His joy was tempered with fear. "Are you afraid?" he asked, holding her hands tightly in his. "After Samuel, yes," Emma admitted. "But this time is different. I'm stronger now, and we're not alone out here anymore." It was true over the winter months. 2 more families had settled within riding distance of New Haven, including a former Army doctor and his wife. The community was small but growing, with talk of establishing a proper school by year's end. As Emma's pregnancy progressed, Thomas became fiercely protective, insisting she rest often and taking on more of the household duties. Emma humored him to a point but refused to be treated as an invalid. "This baby is strong," she would say, placing his hand on her growing belly to feel the vigorous kicks. "Just like its father." The months passed in a blend of anticipation and practical preparation. Thomas added a small room to the cabin for the nursery, crafting a cradle from pine with loving attention to detail. Emma sewed tiny garments, sometimes pausing to remember Samuel, but finding that the sharp pain of loss had softened to a gentle ache that could coexist with new hope. Miss Jensen, now a regular visitor to New Haven, brought news from town and helped Emma put up preserves for the winter ahead. She had grown fond of both Emersons and often remarked on the obvious devotion between them. "You two make marriage look natural as breathing," she said one afternoon as they picked berries together. "Not like some couples I know who seem to be at war half the time." Emma smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her and Thomas to this point. "Marriage takes work," she said. "But when you truly care for someone, the work becomes a joy." In late November, as the first cold winds of winter returned to the hills around New Haven, Emma went into labor. Unlike the traumatic birth of Samuel, this time everything progressed normally. With Thomas at her side and the doctor's wife serving as midwife, Emma delivered a healthy baby girl just after midnight. "She's perfect," Thomas whispered, awestruck as he held his daughter for the first time. "Look at all that hair, just like her mother's." Emma, exhausted but radiant, reached up to touch the dark curls that crowned the infant's head. "What shall we call her?" Thomas considered for a moment. "Hope," he said finally, "because that's what she represents for us." "Hope Emerson," Emma tested the name. "It's beautiful." As winter settled over New Haven, the little family established new rhythms around the baby's needs. Thomas built a larger hearth to ensure the cabin stayed warm through the coldest nights, and Emma mastered the art of nursing while continuing to manage their growing household. By spring, New Haven had truly transformed from a humble homestead to a prosperous small ranch. Thomas's cattle herd had grown to 30 head. The addition of 2 milk cows provided steady income from butter and cheese sold in town, and Emma's garden expanded to include medicinal herbs that were in demand at the fort. On Hope's first birthday, they hosted a small gathering, the first real celebration at New Haven. The doctor and his wife came, as did Miss Jensen and the other neighboring family. As Emma watched Thomas showing their guests the new barn he'd built, Hope perched securely on his shoulders. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the life they had created together. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Hope was asleep in her crib, Thomas and Emma stood on the porch, looking out at the land that had become their home. "You ever think about Austin?" Thomas asked, his arm around her waist. Emma considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it feels like another life now, one that belonged to a different Emma." Thomas nodded. "I received a letter today," he said, "from Fort Davis. The Army's expanding the fort and they're looking for a man to oversee lumber supplies for the new construction. The commander recommended me for the position." Emma turned to face him. "That's wonderful, Thomas. It would mean steady income, wouldn't it?" "It would," he agreed. but it would also mean more time away from New Haven, from you and Hope. I wanted to discuss it with you before making any decision." Emma reached up to touch his face, still marveling sometimes that she could do so freely. "You should accept the position," she said firmly. "New Haven is established enough now that I can manage things when you're away, and the extra income would help us build for the future Hope's future." Thomas caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Have I told you lately what a remarkable woman you are, Emma Emerson?" She smiled up at him. "Not since this morning," he laughed, drawing her closer. "Well, you are, and I thank God every day that I happen to ride by Mrs. Crawford's boarding house at exactly the right moment." Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "It wasn't chance, Thomas. It was Providence." As they stood together in the gathering dusk, Emma thought of the desperate young woman she had been 2 years ago, sitting alone on her father's porch with nowhere to go and no future she could imagine. How could she have known that a quiet cowboy with kind eyes would change everything with a simple proposal? "We start anew," Thomas had said that night in Austin, and they had building a home, a family, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. New Haven had lived up to its name, becoming not just a refuge from past storms but a place where dreams took root and flourished. As hope grew, so did the ranch and the small community around it. By her 5th birthday, Hope had 2 younger brothers, Samuel, named for the brother she would never meet, and James, after Thomas's father. The years brought changes: a proper school where Emma occasionally taught, a small church where Thomas served as deacon, new neighbors, and new opportunities. Through it all, Thomas and Emma remained each other's strength and solace, their love deepening with shared joys and sorrows. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas presented Emma with a gift, the deed to New Haven, with both their names inscribed as equal owners. "It was always meant to be ours together," he said as they sat on the porch of the home they had built, watching their children play in the yard that now boasted a swing set Thomas had constructed. "But now it's official." Emma looked out at their land, the fields where cattle grazed, the orchard just coming into its first real harvest, the garden that now supplied vegetables for 3 families besides their own. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on a desperate pregnant woman you barely knew?" Thomas turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "Regret the best decision I ever made, not for a single moment." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the simple gold band he'd placed there a decade before. "You and the children, this land, you're everything to me, Emma." As the sun set over New Haven, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emma leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its darkest moments. From desperation had come hope, from an arrangement of convenience, the deepest love she could imagine. "We start anew," Thomas had promised, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting, a true haven for themselves and for generations to come.